All right, Isaiah, thank you for that. And welcome into today's roundtable, filling in here for Bill Priestley. And we've got a pretty interesting discussion on tap for today. We are talking about the Panama Canal and if it could truly become a real liability for shippers. And so joining us to do that, we've got Dr. Sal Mercogliano joining us from, it looks like, the football field of Campbell University. Sal, is that where you're at?
I'm actually at the football field at East Carolina University in beautiful Greenville, North Carolina. It's a balmy 50 degrees out here.
And there you go. I love that, reporting live from the stands there. And we've also got John D. McCown joining us from the Center for Maritime Strategy. Guys, thank you so much for being here on this roundtable. Obviously, we've been covering the Panama Canal now for quite a while. Now, as of this morning, we saw more vessel restrictions go on into place, taking that down to 22 crossings per day allowed across the canal. We've seen wait times anywhere upwards of 25 days if you don't have a reservation, depending on which way you're going. Sal, I'm going to start with you. At this point, if you're a shipper and you are someone who actively uses the canal, should you already have options lined up for alternate routes?
Yeah, I think you got to be looking at what are the potential alternatives out there. The prospect here is not looking good. By February 1st, we're looking at a halfway reduction in the number of ships going through the canal. That includes through the Neo-Panamax lane. So you're already seeing ship diversions taking place. If you can book and get yourself on the schedule, then you're good to go. But right now, what we're seeing is ships waiting up to 2 to 3 weeks to get through the canal. And that's going to throw off schedules. What this is most impacting is going to be grain and fuel oil. LNG, oil going through. Container ships on pretty good fixed schedules, but ships that do the spot chartering, that's going to be a big problem. And we're already seeing those diversions heading eastward, either through the Suez Canal or southward around the Cape of Good Hope, around the southern tip of Africa.
So our maritime reporter, Greg Miller, put out a really great article this morning talking about those refined petroleum shippers who are now having to pay just exorbitant spot rates. And we've seen those spot rates jump up, some cases 105% from the start of November to now. John, as we're looking at this, what are shippers really having to deal with in terms of the cost increase perspective? Is it more than just the money right now? It's the time, the wasted time, and now the additional transit time, as Sal was talking about.
Well, Sal's right. The container shipping sector isn't really impacted as much because they have schedules, and so they're kind of first in line with the canals, and also the container ships draw less water, so they're not as impacted. And the carriers are going to already be making adjustments to their schedule. If you look at most of the freight coming into the U.S., 67% comes from Asia, and anywhere from points Singapore west, it's actually shorter to go to the East Coast. So obviously, in the container sector, the lane that's most affected is Asia to the East Coast, but almost all of those services now are direct to the East Coast. So it's really kind of a matter of the carriers adjusting rather than going kind of eastward through the Panama Canal to go to the East Coast, to go westward through the Suez. So there'll be a little more transit time if you're at points east of Singapore, but not much, and certainly not as much as some of the delays we're seeing.
So, of course, we know that the issue in Panama is not the only thing causing headaches for choke points right now. The Israel-Hamas conflict also causing trouble, a little bit more indirectly at the Suez Canal than what we're seeing with the Panama Canal, but it's still causing issues. We saw earlier this week the Zim Europe enter the Mediterranean with the intention to kind of go through and then go through the Suez, and it said, nope, I'm turning around and getting out of there. Now that we see these kind of global conflict and the, of course, weather conflict impacting two specific choke points, Sal, what are shippers' options? Is it just kind of to deal with it right now, or is there now a plan B, C, or even D?
Well, I mean, water gets into the cracks of sidewalks, and as the shipping does, it will find its way around. If they're blocked out of going through the Suez Canal, or more importantly, not really blocked, but don't want to go through the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb, because they're worried about rising insurance rates, they're worried about potential connections, if they have some sort of Israeli ownership, that they could be attacked, then you're seeing ships route around. Again, remember, one of the things we have right now is a plethora of ships. We've got a lot of ships out there, especially in the container sector. So ships can absorb a lot of this. What we're going to start seeing, Bud, is the impact on freight rates. We're seeing reductions. OPEC Plus just announced a reduction in oil production, so that's going to start impacting. We have the excess capacity in ships. Just had the report out by Zentia talking about overcapacity in the container market, meaning there's excess ships out there. All this means that ships may be taking longer distances to get around, but they're still going to be delivering. The problem you get into are choke points that don't have alternatives. This is the Straits of Hormuz. This is the Turkish Straits coming out of the Black Sea. When those areas get shut down, there are really no alternatives to that. But right now, the only reductions we're seeing in the Bab el-Mandeb, the Gate of Tears, is really ships that have a connection to Israeli ownership.
So, John, obviously we know that some of these rates that are increasing are going to have to eventually be passed off at some points. The carriers, of course, are going to want to pass those rates off in order to, or the shippers, that is, are going to want to pass those rates off, right, in order to kind of recoup that profit. Do we see any chance of this impacting the kind of downline economy, any of the downline consumers with any types of goods inflation or anything like that? Or is that something that we don't necessarily need to worry about in this case?
Kind of with the latest data, I would say we don't need to worry about that a lot. Rates have already come down rather significantly. The industry, the numbers that I see, the industry earned $2.6 billion in the third quarter, but that's down 96% from what they earned the third quarter of last year. And that's all driven by rates being significantly below what they are, and we're entering a situation where the capacity is continuing to grow with new vessels ordered, and so I think there's a lot that even as bad as the Panama Canal situation looks, they're ready alternatives that the carriers are already making. I mean, shipping by its very nature is kind of an eminently adaptable industry. Ships always have to plot a course based on weather, obviously international tension. So shipping is already kind of making a lot of adjustments, and the Panama Canal issue lends itself to multiple kind of adaptations, most particularly on the container sector.
So the Panama Canal Authority has put out their plans extended into the beginning of the year with the intention to drop crossings down to 18 per day starting on February 1st. Sal, as they look out further than that, and obviously the drought is something that is not a man-made solution, they just kind of have to wait for rain to fill up that lake again that feeds the canal. Do we look at the Canal Authority potentially dropping crossings even more off of that 18, or do you think that is there a minimum point, that is, where those crossings will kind of stop?
I think right now the 18 is probably where we're going to see it set. The danger in this scenario is we are at the top of the wet season right now, but the lake level, Gatun Lake, which is the freshwater lake that supplies the Panama Canal, is lower than it's usually over the 5-year average for the dry season, and dry season is May to June. And so the prospect here is as we go into the new year that Panama doesn't get the rain it needs. And, the canal consumes about 50% of the total water usage out of the canal, out of the lake over the course of the year. About half of that goes through the old locks, and about half of that goes into the new locks. And the danger becomes that, you can see a potential closing of the Neo-Panamax lanes. They use 25% of that water out of that, and you may see that shutdown take place. The canal has not dealt with an issue. The last time they had a drought like this was before the Neo-Panamax lanes went in. And so this changes the entire environment, in Panama. And so we're really in uncharted waters where it comes if they don't get substantial rain here anytime soon, and they go much lower into the dry season.
John, do you agree with that? That you think the 18 is kind of that minimum point where they'll cut off crossings as low as that?
Well, Sal's right. It could get worse. That's out of my area. But I guess again, to get back to the core point, there are all sorts of alternatives here, and so it's not something. The alternatives, some of them will result in higher cost. But again, we're in a situation where there's significant excess capacity with more coming on. So it just seems like between both shippers, making their own plans, but most particularly carriers are already kind of making adaptations that will kind of mitigate this. So, but it is something to kind of pay attention to.
All right, guys. Well, thank you both for joining us for this roundtable today. We appreciate it as always, and we will certainly be keeping an eye on the situation as it develops.
Thanks for having us, Kaylee. Go Pirates.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take one final break, and then we'll be back to wrap up your Friday show in just a few minutes.